Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with a solo pod for you today. It's probably going to be a little bit of a shorter episode today. If you can't tell by my voice already, I'm a little bit under the weather. So trying to save that a little bit here, but I'm probably not going to go as in depth as I normally do, or at least hit as many topics as I normally do, but I still want to go to a pretty good level of depth on the ones that I'm going to hit there. So we're going to cover the Vikings game against the Bears. Obviously a nail biter that really didn't need to be if the Vikings could just recover an onside kick. Right. And then we're going to look to the Cardinals and talk about, there's been like a lot of actually other activity in the Vikings space. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, with Ivan Pace injury and things like that. So, we're going to start it off here with the Vikings offense against the Bears. And I think the thing that stands out most to me from the game was Sam Darnold in particular. I thought Sam Darnold had a fantastic game. I might have said last week his game against the Titans was one of his best in Minnesota Vikings uniforms. I think I would say that pretty definitively this game was Darnold's best as a Viking in a Viking uniform. He was credited with 2 turnover-worthy plays by PFF. There absolutely were 2 plays that hit off of defenders' hands. And both were very similar plays. So Darnold was trying to anticipate in cuts, whether it was a dig route or some other type of in-breaking route to Justin Jefferson in both cases where Jefferson was wrapping around a defender. So the first one was Kyler Gordon. You may remember the one that bounced off of Gordon's hands. And then the second one was Tremaine Edmonds, where it kind of went off of his hands, right? And he jumped in front of Jefferson. And honestly, I thought Darnold made the right decision on the play. We see a ton, and I love to highlight it, when quarterbacks make these anticipation throws on those in-breaking routes. And I just thought that the defensive player in both cases really read the play of as well as he could have and was twitchy enough to be able to get back inside and make the play. Because typically the reason the quarterback's anticipating and the reason the quarterback's able to anticipate is he gets the defender to widen, and they don't have the ability to turn their hips and get back inside to get underneath the route by the receiver who's running behind them. And Kyler Gordon was a great example on the first play of the 2 that I'm referencing, where he widens out and Darnold sees that widen out, knows he's going to have Jefferson come under open on the in cut, and Gordon just does a great job getting under that ball. That was just a phenomenal play from the defensive back. And I thought the same for the Tremaine Edmonds play. So I would take those 2 turnover-worthy plays and say, I don't think they were Sam Darnold's fault. And at that point, I think he really has put the ball in harm's way a couple times in even some of the better games, even against the Titans last week, or even in some of I didn't agree with some of the sacks he took, and even some of the better games early in the season, like the Texans game or the Packers game, or not the Packers game, but the 49ers game. There were instances where Darnold made a couple mistakes. I really didn't see many mistakes or missed opportunities downfield. There was one sack that Darnold took where he ended up scrambling, where I thought he had a couple options. He had Jefferson early and Addison late, but he was also moving by the time I thought he had Addison open, so I don't really know if he would have had a clean enough pocket to make the throw. So I'm being pretty nitpicky, I think, if I wanted to grade him there. So other than that, I thought he was nails. I guess technically he had an interception negated by penalty on the 35-yard defensive pass interference to Jefferson. I don't count that because I think Jefferson makes that catch if Jalen Johnson doesn't grab his jersey and hold him up. I don't think the DB is even trying to make the interception. So, but yeah, absolute nails, especially coming back after hurting his foot, at the end of the game, completing multiple passes to drive the Vikings down the field, a fade to TJ Hockenson, to get the field goal. To go up 11, and then in overtime, they started out backing themselves up with a 7-yard sack that I really didn't think there was anything there downfield. Darnold probably should have checked down, but it's kind of questionable, but he makes up for it, right? He gets them back to 3rd and 10, with a nice little check down, and then converts a play to Addison. Then they back themselves up again with a false start. Very next play, he rifles in a throw over the middle to Justin Jefferson. Jefferson has the defensive back draped off on him. He's able to break the tackle, get 20-something yards on the play, right? Very next play, holding call on the offense, right? So shooting themselves in the foot, putting themselves behind the chains, And I think they got it to like a 2nd and 12 or something. And that's when he hit TJ Hockenson on the big deep over, that basically sealed the game for the Vikings, right? They just kneel down and kick. But, I thought those plays were very impressive. I thought the deep post to Jordan Addison, that was a beautiful throw. Maybe a step behind, but whatever. I thought the touchdown to Jordan Addison in particular was a phenomenal throw from Darnold. During the broadcast, I thought that Darnold, kind of threw it up there for Addison, and Addison had to make a really good contested catch. That's just what it looked like from that angle. But if you watch it from the end zone angle, you can see that Darnold really puts the ball in a place where Addison has a step on the defender, and he has to lift his hands out so the defender's arms can't really impede Addison's ability to catch the ball at all. So I think Darnold's throw really helped Addison catch that touchdown and make that catch through contact from the defender on that play. So I was really impressed with that throw. And then I guess just the overall theme for me with Darnold throughout the course of the game was what I'll call pocket calmness, right? He was very calm under pressure in the pocket. You didn't see him make frantic plays. You saw him consistently throw the ball away once he escaped from pressure. And he looked to escape in a couple instances and threw the ball away, but I think that was valid because there was pressure coming on those plays and there weren't really all that many options downfield in those situations. But otherwise, there were really a number of plays where he kind of stuck in there and delivered an accurate ball. Despite the fact that there was pressure or he was getting somebody kind of pushed back into him. I think that happened for Dalton Risner a couple times where he had the guy blocked, but just where Darnold was set up in the pocket, Darnold was kind of moving forward, trying to make a throw and wasn't really able to step into the throw. And I think this kind of happened on the big Addison post, actually, but was still able to deliver an accurate pass despite not being able to fully step in, get all of his cleats in the ground and rip the throw as you might want to as a quarterback. So, I thought it was a really high level game from Sam Darnold. We didn't, I guess, see the scrambling, like rushing and gaining yardage ability. I think the one rush he did have, which may have been actually the overtime holding penalty. I think it was, ended up getting called back. But, outside of that, I thought great game from Sam Darnold overall. And then I want to flip it over to, another storyline of the game for me, which was just how well the Vikings weapons outside of Justin Jefferson played in this game. And I think a lot of their good play, that I shouldn't say that. That's not fair to them. I think individually, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, and TJ Hockenson had fantastic games, right? All of them had over 100 yards from scrimmage, right? Addison and Hockenson obviously had over 100 receiving yards. Jones had over 100 rushing yards. But I would also say, that Justin Jefferson and his presence and how the Bears dealt with Justin Jefferson really helped those guys reach those peaks in those games, right? So they made great individual plays, and then also the Bears' defensive focus were how they were so wide open. And, I'm not sure that entirely applies to like Jordan Addison, because really, if you look at it, his two big plays were the 40-yard post catch and then the 69-yard play that ended up, it was a question of whether or not he was in or out of bounds. The Bears challenged it and they weren't able to overturn it for a ridiculous NFL rule. By the way, the fact I don't understand exactly what it is, but I guess because that specific camera angle down the sideline does not exist in all the NFL stadiums. And I think it's a little bit different from the end zone camera. Like the end zone camera in the All-22 is centered in the middle of the end zone. I think this camera that they showed the broadcast angle of, they showed the angle of on the broadcast, was actually aimed like directly down the sideline. I guess because they don't have that in every single stadium, they can't use it on a coach's challenge specifically, but they could still use it if it was a booth review. Like, that's just absolute ridiculous, archaic nonsense, NFL. Like, you need to fix your review process. I've written about this probably multiple times at this point, but if not, I wrote a zone coverage article like over a year ago about how much better the like startup leagues review process was and how much more engaging it was for fans to be able to see that. And the NFL just needs to do that. They just need to do a better job of this review process. It's really frustrating. But I apologize for that tangent there because I want to get back to Jordan Addison. I thought the post was a nice win from him. I thought it was a great play design from Kevin O'Connell. You see the safety nailed down on Justin Jefferson's crosser. I don't think that's the safety paying extra attention to Justin Jefferson in this case. I think that's just what the safeties are taught to do when you have that sort of play, and Jalen Johnson really should have peeled off and gone deep and taken that safety's deep responsibility for the post. Now, it's a really difficult ask for Jalen Johnson in this case, and he kind of loafed a little bit, if I'm being honest. But I just thought so the Bears were playing quarters on that play, and the Vikings had 3 vertical threats in Justin Jefferson, TJ Hockenson, and Jordan Addison. Hockenson and Addison were coming from the same side. So if you think about it, you have a corner and a safety over that side. They're responsible for Jordan Addison and TJ Hockenson. However, if the outside corner, he has to play outside leverage, because he doesn't want to get beat outside in quarters. So he needs help to the post. Usually the safety to that side would be help to the post, but sometimes the safety to the other side can be help to the post, right? But because the Vikings ran Hockenson deep, the safety to that side had to come down and care about TJ Hockenson, right? So the corner to the far outside doesn't have help inside because TJ Hockenson is holding him down. And then on the other side of the field, you have Jalen Johnson and the other safety, and Jefferson runs a crossing route. Once again, Johnson has outside leverage, so he needs help on in-breaking routes from Justin Jefferson in that situation. And that's why the safety nails down on the crossing route from Justin Jefferson. So that means that if you have 4 deep defenders across the board, right, the corner to the left has deep responsibility for Jordan Addison. The corner to the middle could help the safety in the middle on Hockenson's side could help on a post from Addison, but he's taken away by the deep curl route, or maybe it was a deep over route, but I think it was a deep curl route by Hockenson. And then the next safety, the third safety, right, is taken away by the deep crosser by Justin Jefferson. So the post help for the corner on the far left side has to come from the corner on the far right side. And that just makes it really, really difficult to be able to help. So as soon as Darnold sees quarters in that situation, I think he's ripping the throw, because it's basically impossible for Jalen Johnson to help, to be post help on that play. And of course it works out for a big gain. But that's also credit to Jordan Addison for making a catch in what wasn't terrible coverage from the outside corner. Like, he was within a step of him. He just wasn't able to stop the post because he's playing with outside leverage. He's at a natural disadvantage. Jordan Addison took advantage of that disadvantage. And then if you look at the big 69-yard play, you see that the deep safety, and I think it was cover 3 to that side, and it was Addison and Jefferson on the same side. The deep safety's on the hash. He plays the hash the entire time. And he's playing the hash the entire time. But the corner to the other side gets drawn up, I believe, by the run fake. I think it was a play action play. So really, the corner has deep responsibility against Jordan Addison to that side, but he's not in the play, and the safety has to try to get over to cover it, but he's just late to react to Addison running the over route. He's got to read both Addison and Jefferson and help on the vertical of both of those guys. So I don't necessarily blame him for it, but I don't think it was necessarily that he was paying extra attention to Justin Jefferson either. I think he breaks when he sees Addison break. He was just late to anticipate Addison's break, so he's out of position. And then Addison does the rest with kind of defeating the angle with the speed and being able to tiptoe down the sideline and getting 69 yards on the play, right? So really great individual plays by Jordan Addison. I did think the TD was helped out by Justin Jefferson a little bit, and basically the Bears were running cover 1 man with a rat, or I guess technically a robber if you count the safety as a robber. And the safety probably should have cut, like the way I would have preferred the Bears to do it would be to cut Jordan Addison, meaning Addison's running a crossing route, the rat takes the player running the crossing route, and then the player who was on Addison, who I think was Jonathan Owens, would become the new rat. Instead, the rat who was Byard dropped off and helped with a middle of the field zone, and that ended up being double coverage on Justin Jefferson. That's a valid way to play it, even if it's not Justin Jefferson that you're worried about, right? But it helped because I talked about the leverage that Darnold was able to make that throw with, and, the space that Addison created by getting a step on Jonathan Owens to have give Darnold the ability to put him in the perfect spot. So, I think the way they played it, probably paid a little bit much attention to Jefferson, so he helped Addison out in that case. Otherwise, I think it was mostly Addison helping himself. TJ Hockenson, I think definitely, even though he made good plays, especially the catch against Kevin Byard where he forced holding, and then made a contested catch anyway. But like, if you look at a couple of his big plays, you can tell that the defense is paying extra attention to Justin Jefferson. And specifically, what they were doing is they were putting Jalen Johnson in press man coverage on Justin Jefferson, and they were running zone in other areas in the field. So that big play, that led to the game-winning field goal in overtime, Jalen Johnson presses Justin Jefferson off the line of scrimmage. Jonathan Owens to that side. I think Owens is in a cover 3 zone. But Jonathan Owens to that side ends up also chucking Justin Jefferson once he gets to like 5 yards or something, trying to put his hands on him, and completely abandons his deep third zone responsibility, which has TJ Hockenson coming across wide open to get like 30 plus yards or whatever he got on that play. And if you look at the other big TJ Hockenson play, which was the one that set up the field goal that put the Vikings up 11, there's another great Kevin O'Connell third down bunch design where he had Hockenson motion from the outside into the bunch. So it was a 3-man stack with Hockenson being the outside most player on the 3-man stack. He motions inside, it becomes a bunch. And the Bears are playing press man coverage on both Addison and Jefferson. So they have a linebacker, TJ Edwards, manned up on TJ Hockenson. Hockenson moving inside forces the linebacker to move inside with him. And then they have Hockenson run a switch release with the 2 receivers. So Hockenson goes to the outside on essentially a wheel route, and Jefferson and Addison, but Jefferson specifically attacks upfield. So when Jefferson attacks upfield and Hockenson is running to the outside, the linebacker's trying to move laterally, and he clips feet with Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson ends up falling down on the play. He absolutely interfered with Justin Jefferson, or held Justin Jefferson, or whatever you want to say, because as he's falling down, he grabs Justin Jefferson and basically bends him, so he's standing like completely bent over. But the little bit of a clip of a foot plus TJ Hawkinson's natural athleticism, like I think TJ Hockenson against a linebacker is a matchup I'll take 1-on-1 any day. And I think Edwards plays a little flat-footed, and TJ Hockenson has the speed to go out and win this. So I don't want to say like Jefferson caused Hockenson to win, because I think Hawkinson's own ability also helped him win. But, it just creates TJ Hockenson wide open once again. So those plays absolutely open it up. The Jalen Nailor touchdown was another one, and there was a couple other plays, where on the Jalen Nailor touchdown, you can see the defensive back sink because he's concerned about Jefferson running into the corner. And as soon as he sinks, it's a smash concept. So the read for the quarterback is if the defender in the flat sinks back towards the corner, you throw the flat. Sam Darnold throws the flat. And obviously, if he goes up towards the flat, you throw the corner, right? That's the read. It's just a high-low read on that corner. So Sam Darnold throws the flat. Jalen Nailor has just enough space to get it in for the touchdown, right? That's Justin Jefferson influencing the game without putting up numbers in the box score, 2 catches for 27 yards or whatever. Obviously, he also influenced the game by the pass interference calls that he got, one of which directly led to a touchdown, right? I think because the Vikings were put in scoring range. I think that was actually the Nailor touchdown is what that led to. And then the other one converted a 3rd down, right? So pretty impactful. Those items don't get put in the box score because I guess, even though they move the football for the offense, we can't count them as passing yards because it's technically not a pass. And that would screw everything up from sports gambling to fantasy football to everything on down. So I understand why it's not changed. But, that is what it is. So great offensive output from the Vikings. And I think it was all driven by who Kevin O'Connell is as a play caller. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into, because I guess I saw on Twitter, like, some people make references to people massively complaining about the Vikings play calling, and like even calling for Kevin O'Connell to like give up play calling duties. And that is honestly, and hopefully I don't need to explain this to you too hard if you listen to this podcast, but that is one of the most ridiculous things I have ever heard. And I guess I can see some people having frustration about like the 4th down call that the Vikings failed, right? Which a 4th down call that TJ Hockenson was open on, and Sam Darnold, who read out the play, was a tick late to get to. Like, I don't really put it all that much on Sam Darnold. I think he probably could have moved on to his reads a little bit faster, but like, at the end of the day, it probably wasn't the best play call in the world in that situation, but it wasn't a bad play call. They got a player open. I just didn't love the fact that Darnold opened to the left-hand side on that, which had like Addison and Aaron Jones as the read. I would rather have my read be a Justin Jefferson and TJ Hockenson combo on that play, particularly TJ Hockenson, who's great at making contested catches in those short yardage situations. But if you look at overall, the Vikings are 4 for 7 on fourth down. That rate is 17th in the NFL, so it's middle of the pack, but it's not atrocious, right? It's not to the level where we should, and anyway, look at the way Kevin O'Connell is calling fourth down plays, and that includes a lot of fourth and shorts, right, around that area of the field, and say that he's bad at it. It's also notable that they've only had to do it 7 times because the offense, A, moves the ball pretty effectively, but B, we've been winning so many games that they don't really need to go for it on fourth downs in those kind of questionable situations. So I just think that criticizing Kevin O'Connell and saying he should give up play calling duties because you disagree with like one fourth down call or something like that completely misses the entire picture of what he's able to do as a play caller. I talked in my designs about a couple of the detailed nuances that the Vikings put together from an offensive perspective that is Kevin O'Connell's job, that are just so high level and so effective at attacking the opposing defense. And that's what O'Connell brings on a consistent basis. Like, his play design is up there with absolutely the best in the NFL right now. Like, I would probably say he's a top 5 play caller in the NFL, and that includes Ben Johnson, that includes Andy Reid, that includes Matt LaFleur, that includes Sean McVay, that includes Kyle Shanahan, right? I just named 6 guys. I think that if you took somebody who's kind of independent, looked at the tape, who had a strong understanding of like what offenses are trying to do from a schematic perspective, looked at the tape of all of those guys, I think Kevin O'Connell would probably come out above at least a couple of those guys who are generally the consensus top player callers in the NFL right now, right? I think he calls plays at a really, really high level. And I talk consistently on this podcast about the design details that show that. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, Kevin O'Connell's awesome. There is no world where I don't want him to be the offensive play caller for the Minnesota Vikings. For like, honestly, like ever. Like, he's great. If you want to read a little bit more about Justin Jefferson and how he opens stuff up for the rest of the offense, I do have an article out on Zone Coverage. It's probably coming out Wednesday morning, so this might get out Tuesday night, so there might be a little bit of time before the article comes out, but most of you will probably listen to it. By the time you're listening to this, the article will be out on zonecoverage.com. I also have an article on how Kevin O'Connell has been such an effective play caller and it's lifted Sam Darnold. That came out around the bye week. So if you just go to my author bio, it should be there as well. And it just kind of talks about some of the impressive elements of play calling design that Kevin O'Connell has, particularly his third down bunch motion stuff, which I think is one of the most innovative things that are going on in the NFL right now. So with all that being said, I just want to flip it over to the defensive side of the ball for a little bit, and then we'll get on to a couple of the other items that I want to talk about. So on defense, first, I have to shout out, and I hate to do it, and I don't think anybody really listening to this is going to like to hear it, but I thought Akayleb Evans played a fantastic football game. There were some blemishes. Like, he had 3 balls that could have been picked. I talked about the passes that Sam Darnold could have been picked. I thought those interceptions were a little more valid than the potential interceptions from Sam Darnold. There was one where he just missed a ball over the middle to Cole Kmet high, and Harrison Smith couldn't make a catch on it. There was one where he was trying to throw a seam route to Keenan Allen, and he definitely wasn't on the same page. I don't think the pass was very accurate, to be honest with you, because even if Allen was trying to go back shoulder on that seam, I don't think it was in a situation where Allen could have caught it at all. But Cam Bynum kind of dropped that one and let it go through his hands, which is rare for him, right? Like, he's got great ball skills. And then the third one came on the Bears' final drive of regulation, I believe, where it was Tampa 2 and Williams was trying to hit a hole shot. Stephon Gilmore came off of that and almost intercepted it. I think that's more of a good play by Gilmore. Not to the level that it was complimenting like Kyler Gordon, but I think it's more of a, because that is an area where you need to be cognizant of what that underneath corner is doing if you're a quarterback. But, more of a good play by Gilmore and an instinctive play by him than necessarily a terrible decision by Williams. But still, I think on the same level or worse of a decision than what we saw from Sam Darnold in his 2 interceptable plays, which another thing I want to get to just real quick on a tangent is just how awful this Fox broadcast was. Like, it was all about the Bears. It was all about how well Caleb Williams is doing. I talked for a bunch about how well Sam Darnold did. I thought Sam Darnold outplayed Caleb Williams. And again, I thought Caleb played really well, but nobody's talking about Sam Darnold because he's not interesting because it wasn't the number 1 overall pick. Right. And then it was also bizarrely all about the Bears defense and how they were playing well. And that was the weirdest thing to me is like, after the Aaron Jones touchdown, who I didn't touch on at all, but I thought he ran very well, right? Aaron Jones, I thought had a very good game, totally deserved the 100 yards that he got. Obviously, the fumble is a blemish, but he made up for it with the touchdown. But when the Bears were on defense, they were talking about how like DeMarcus Walker was having this awesome game. And that's the first thing that Daryl Johnston led with when Aaron Jones scored that touchdown was how good of a game DeMarcus Walker was having. It's like, dude, they're losing by like 11 points and the Vikings just scored a touchdown. Why are you complimenting the Bears defense? And then they're talking about how they were shutting down Justin Jefferson. Meanwhile, TJ Hockenson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones are all going off for 100+ yards, right? Like it was just a bizarre focus, and it didn't seem like they'd prepped for the Minnesota Vikings to play well in the game, which the Minnesota Vikings had the lead by like a significant amount, basically the entire game. And it was all about how good the Bears were playing, despite the fact that they were losing. So really weird broadcast to me. Didn't like it at all. Would not recommend. And like honestly, I thought some of Moose's like analysis when he's breaking down plays was pretty good, but just the overall tone of the broadcast was super weird to me. Again, Caleb Williams, awesome. Like we can say as Vikings fans, oh, look at how close he was to not making some of the great plays he's made. Like Andrew Van Ginkel got so close to deflecting that 40-yard pass to Keenan Allen, or he got so close to sacking Caleb Williams on the 30-yard pass to DeAndre Swift, or they should have called holding on the one where he escaped and threw a laser to Cole Kmet that Kmet couldn't bring in when he was in the end zone, right? And it should have been a safety. I agree with the holding one. The other two is like, okay, this Vikings defense is the best defense in the NFL. Right. They're the best by EPA per play. They're the best by DVOA. Pretty much any way you slice it, they are the best defense in the NFL. If Caleb Williams is able to do this against the best defense in the NFL, who just shut down, notably bad quarterbacks in Will Levis and Joe Flacco and Mac Jones for 3 weeks to where they had no offensive output, and Williams is able to make these good plays against the Vikings, he's that good. Like, that's the unfortunate reality for Vikings fans, because we're probably going to have to live with this guy being a great quarterback for the Bears for a long time if we base it off of this performance. I will say, there were some blemishes. It wasn't perfect. I do think there were more misses, I think, just straight up like inaccurate passes than I was expecting from Williams. But overall, I thought he processed things really quickly, and that was the most impressive part. In order to be effective against this Vikings defense, you have to have a high-level processor, a quarterback who's able to quickly go through reads and identify the coverage post-snap and doesn't get confused by the coverages. Like, we confused Aaron Rodgers, right? We confused Jordan Love. We confused Brock Purdy. CJ Stroud, I thought actually played really well when I went back and watched it, but we still got CJ Stroud a couple times, right? We confused him and we made him make mistakes. We couldn't make Caleb Williams make mistakes to that same level. And I think that's a really big compliment to how Caleb Williams played the game. And, his athleticism was obviously on display. And maybe that's a downside for the Vikings defense, right? Maybe they just don't have the guys to be able to corral, because we see guys kind of make plays on those scrambles. But I bet the Vikings scramble EPA isn't worse than like the majority of the league. So I think we're good enough at that where it's not too much of like maybe this is specifically the Vikings weakness. I just think we have kind of high standards. And when the defense doesn't meet those standards because of how they've played, over the last couple of years, we get a little bit disappointed and start thinking the defense is really bad. It's not that the defense is really bad. It's that Akayleb Williams played a really good game. It was really efficient in terms of how he was able to dissect the Vikings defense. And even with all that said, before the game was, I'll call it quote unquote out of hand, right? I think when the Vikings were up 11, really for all intents and purposes, I considered the game over at that point. I understand the Bears got back into the game, right? They tied it. It went to overtime. The Vikings very easily could have lost this football game. But from a defensive perspective, like, you're fine with allowing them to score that final touchdown because you're expecting to recover the onside kick. An opposing team recovering the onside kick is not a sustainable way for the Vikings to lose football games, right? Recovering an onside kick is incredibly difficult. They got lucky that it bounced off of Munt's leg and they were able to catch it. The Vikings have recovered how many onside kicks this year? Like 3 or 4 plus onside kicks this year, right? I don't think it's a sustainable problem. So when you're playing defense in that situation, you just want to make sure that they don't score too fast. And the Vikings did a pretty good job of making sure they didn't score too fast, considering that the Bears had 20 seconds left. But honestly, like, all the Vikings needed to do was get the ball back, because they could have just knelt it out as soon as they had possession of the ball if they got it at any point after kicking that final field goal, because we were past the 2-minute warning and the Bears had no timeouts, right? So at the end of the day, if special teams does its job, which it didn't do, we're not talking about any of what happened at the end of the game in garbage time at all. So I don't really put that on the defense, and I want to get into it a little bit because the 2-minute defense has been a topic of conversation. First of all, I also want to touch a little bit on, I think, some of the consternation with Kevin O'Connell's fourth and one decision earlier in the game got compounded by the fact that we kicked the field goal instead of going for it, when if we go for it and we make that, we win the game automatically, right? And all we have to do is kneel out. In that situation, to me, kicking the field goal is the right call 10 times out of 10, not 9 times out of 10, or 9 times out of 10, not 99 times out of 100. 10 times out of 10, that is the correct call. 100% of the situations, I want my head coach to kick a field goal there, because, again, the opponent needs to not only score a touchdown, not only get a 2-point conversion, not only recover an onside kick, but also successfully get the ball back down the field and make a field goal, right? They need all 4 of those things, which are probably the scoring a touchdown against prevent defense is a medium probability. Getting the 2-point conversion is a 50-50 shot, right? The Bears went 1 for 2 on 2-point conversions. It's roughly a 50-50 shot. It's actually like a 46% shot, right? So you're already below 50% there. Recovering an onside kick is like a 10% chance. So you already have like less than a 1% chance. And the Vikings had like a 99.6 win probability by the time they kicked that field goal, right? Like, they were absolutely supposed to win that football game. And fortunately they did. But, from a decision-making standpoint, absolutely kick the field goal. From a defensive standpoint, I agree with how they played it. So if you look at that drive, I think the way the Vikings called it did back off a little bit compared to what they had done previously. If you look at the previous touchdown drive, there's still a lot of cover 3. There's a lot of quarters, and the Vikings are primarily a quarters defense. That they're running. There's Tampa 2 mixed in, and they ran a lot more man coverage, I would say, in this game and last week against the Titans than we had seen throughout. But on the final drive of the game, the coverages the Vikings ran were 2-man, Tampa 2, and 0. There were not quarters reps in that situation. So that's definitely playing softer coverage to me. 2-man, you man up so everybody can run with somebody vertical, and you still have 2 safeties over the top, as opposed to the situation where you can get a 1-on-1 deep route, like on the inside, like I talked about with the Jordan Addison post in quarters. Tampa 2, kind of similar. You're protected up the middle of the field with the pole runner. Your guys kind of underneath can run under stuff. And the Tampa 2 coverage was one where the Gilmore almost got the interception. And then 0 is I'll call it a time wasting play for the defense, right? So when the Vikings are running cover 0, obviously they want to sack the quarterback if the opponent doesn't have a good answer for it. But what they really want to do is force a short completion, right? And that's valuable, especially in the 2-minute drill, because you force a short completion and then you, run the clock, right? The Bears don't want to use uptime, right? The time is their enemy in this case, right? So you force a short completion, you hopefully tackle them in bounds. That's the reason you run cover 2 in that situation. And it worked. It got the Bears down to 20 seconds before Akayleb Williams was able to escape a sack and make a great play to throw a touchdown when the Vikings got a little bit overeager to end the game and sack Akayleb Williams, right? Functionally ending the game because the Bears would have had like 10 something seconds to get back to the line. And then you barely have time for a Hail Mary chance, even if you recover the extra point, right? So Shaq Griffin abandons his responsibility on what's his name, on Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen ends up wide open for the touchdown. Akayleb Williams makes the throw, right? Great play. He escaped what probably should have been a sack, and great individual play from Akayleb Williams there. But, at the end of the day, I'm fine with the coverage because it wasted a ton of time. If you look at the play that set up the field goal, the Vikings were in cover 3, and Akayleb Williams did a good job of manipulating Josh Metellus, who should have been in the zone, probably to stop DJ Moore from making that catch. But Akayleb Williams has a shoulder fake that brings Metellus up to a shorter route, and he's not there for the dig to Moore. So that was kind of a failure on Metellus' part specifically. And the Vikings defense gets it together in overtime, stops Akayleb Williams on a scramble, sacks him, plays great coverage, and it leads to a cover sack with Williams kind of bouncing around too much in the pocket, and then shuts down like a 3rd and 26 play, right? So they get off the field, they do their job. It should also be noted that, like, strategically, I think the way teams play in not so much 2 minutes at the end of the half, but especially 2 minutes at the end of the game has a hidden advantage. There's a couple advantages for the offense, but I think one hidden one is the likelihood that they're going for 4th down conversions on the Bears' final 2 touchdowns, right? Which they both absolutely needed to tie up this football game. They converted 4th downs on both of them, right? And one was, again, a Akayleb Williams scramble where he was just able to barely get outside and was able to convert the 4th down. The other one was a throw, I believe, to Rome Odunze over the middle of the field where Cam Bynum had really close coverage and hit it in the back. And it was a tight window throw that the Vikings forced. And they just weren't able to, make enough of a play to turn the ball over on downs in that situation. So it's not like the Vikings were, giving up on these 4th downs. It's just the opponent kind of made a slightly better play than the Vikings were able to make on defense. And they needed 4 opportunities to do it in those cases. So when you have a 3rd quarter drive, when you get to a 3rd and 3, to a 4th and 3, you're going to kick a field goal or you're going to punt, right? Depending on where you're on the field. When you have a first half drive, you're going to kick a field goal or you're going to punt in a lot of situations. There are some aggressive teams that'll go for it, especially if you're around no man's land. But if you're out like the 20-yard line, you're going to kick a field goal or you're going to punt. When you need a touchdown at the end of the game, you have to go for it in that situation. So, I think that strategically just gives the offense an extra down, right? An extra, and that's like a 33% more opportunity to get another first down. That makes it difficult on any defense, right? You're adding an additional 33% to what your opportunities are, right? Because you have 3 opportunities, divide that by 3, add 1 more. So I think that makes 2-minute defense, especially when you're up, a lot harder. And we combine that with, I talked about the Vikings were playing a little bit more off. That just allows the defense to move the offense to move the ball down the field more effectively as long as they're playing the clock. And then the other thing that I think harms the Vikings defense, which is probably a little bit more obvious and a little bit more straightforward, is that because their defense is so predicated on disguise, opponents running very simple plays like they do in the 2-minute drill, hurrying up to the line, not substituting on offense, making the Vikings kind of line up, and then they snap the ball, and there's no real opportunity for pre-snap disguise or changing things with motion or reading out the play on defense and making a check based on how the offense is lined up, I think does simplify the Vikings defense a little bit. So I don't think, like, it's not purely that, oh, it's easier to move the ball in 2-minute across the board. I think the Vikings defense has a couple of unique challenges there, but the Vikings defense is so good that I don't really want to change it for that specific reason, because I think they still were relatively effective at stopping the Bears, even if they did allow them to tie the game. Because again, outside of a huge special teams mistake, the Bears don't tie the game in this one, right? So that's kind of going to be all I'm talking about against the Bears. I guess I should shout out Jonathan Bullard, who I thought had a great game in run defense. Like, he was the standout player of the game from the Vikings side for me, just in terms of on the defensive side of the ball. But I'll flip it over to the Cardinals a little bit, and I've only got a couple of talking points on them, right? So, like, the first is, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense has been playing really, really well so far this year. So my biggest question is, can Kyler and the Cardinals offense, Drew Petzing, who I believe is their offensive coordinator, was a former Minnesota Vikings guy, I guess, and Nick Rawless under the Zimmer era, and Nick Rawless was also a Vikings guy under the Zimmer era. I think they went with Stefanski to Cleveland, both of them. But, can they figure out the Vikings defense in the way that the Rams and the Bears and the Lions have, right? And have the opportunities to move the ball effectively when they see the coverage back there. And can Kyler actually read out and execute that on the field? Because I think for all of his athletic ability, that's kind of where he lags behind most in terms of who he is as a player, is that processing ability. So I wouldn't have a ton of faith in Kyler being able to process that quickly in the way that Caleb Williams honestly surprised me with how well he was able to do, right? In the way that we know Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford can. So can Kyler and Drew Petzing actually figure that out? If they can, they're going to be able to have a decent day against us. If they can't, and I think it's more likely that they can't, I don't think they'll move the ball with much effectiveness, even with all the physical talents that Kyler has, with the physical talents that Trey McBride has, with the ball, with the talents that Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously has. But the secondary question there is, can the Cardinals actually get a run game going against the Vikings? Because basically nobody except the Lions has been able to get a run game going against the Vikings. Maybe the Rams did it a little bit too. You need to have a great offensive line up front, which I don't think the Cardinals necessarily have. But you might be able to mitigate that, and the Cardinals do have and have had a really, really effective run game the entire time, like Kyler and James Conner have been there, because the quarterback run threat adds an additional layer. And that's not something the Vikings have necessarily played against all that much this year. You could say Daniel Jones is a quarterback run threat, right? But that team's kind of a disaster. And then outside of that, like, the Titans tried to run it with Will Levis, and I talked about last week how the Vikings completely shut that down. But none of the opponents the Vikings have faced, because the Colts decided to start Joe Flacco, have had quarterbacks with a significantly mobile component, especially in the designed run game, right? Caleb Williams didn't really design runs for him, and the Bears run game wasn't effective at all. So I'm interested to see if the Vikings can continue their run defense dominance against a team that doesn't have a great offensive line, but does have the added layer of the quarterback run threat and a good running back, honestly, in James Conner. I would say Conner is not the archetype of running back I'm particularly concerned about for the Vikings. Like, Jahmyr Gibbs killed the Vikings. David Montgomery didn't necessarily kill the Vikings, and Conner is more of the Montgomery variety, right? Than the Gibbs variety in terms of the explosiveness that Gibbs has. So I think the Vikings have a decent shot. The other added layer is that Ivan Pace is going to be out for the Vikings, and I think Ivan Pace coming forward in the run game is absolutely a fantastic asset to the Vikings that Kamu Grugier-Hill does not give them. I think Grugier-Hill is probably a better coverage player at this point than Pace is, but like, part of the reason the Vikings are so good at run defense is because Ivan Pace is so good moving forward and is basically unblockable by opposing offensive linemen, right? So he can just get around them and get to the running back. So I'm a little interested to see how that plays out. But I still think the Vikings will be able to shut down because schematically they've been really good against quarterback run game. So like they have those gaps covered. They'd be able to string runs to the outside by Kyler out. From a schematic perspective, especially because they often play with an extra guy down in the box, right? And that's the reason they're good schematically against it. But we'll see how it plays out. That's kind of interesting. If you flip it over to the offensive side of the ball for the Vikings, I just think they need to not turn the ball over. Like there aren't many players that concern me on the Cardinals defense, right? And they've put together a pretty good defensive performance, despite the fact that they really don't have any stars besides Budda Baker on the other side of the ball. But I think the Vikings offensive firepower can just overtake what the Cardinals are able to do. It's a little bit of a question of whether or not Cam Robinson is going to be able to play. So David Questenberry, who let up a lot of pressure when he had to come in, didn't really get to that too much, but would be an issue. But the Cardinals don't really have a great pass rush threat. I think Zaven Collins, who's like a former linebacker converted to an edge rusher, we'll get to another one of those a little bit later, but is kind of their best pass rusher right now because Dennis Gardeck went on IR. And I just don't see them as significant pass rush threats who will be able to impact Sam Darnold, who I think is playing really well in the pocket right now and against pressure. So as long as Sam Darnold doesn't start making catastrophic mistakes, as long as the Vikings don't continue to fumble the football all the time, I say as long as, right, if they don't have catastrophic fumbles in this game, I think they'll be just fine on offense and be able to outscore the Cardinals in this game. So, if the Cardinals offense is able to put up a fight and actually exploit the Vikings defense, that means I think it's going to be a close game. If they're not going to be able to, I think the Vikings win pretty handily. Obviously, if the Vikings have catastrophic mistakes on offense, then even if their defense is good, it might be a close game. Or if their defense is bad, they're going to lose, right? So and the Vikings have had a ton of catastrophic mistakes on offense this year, right? So it's not a guaranteed thing by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think they're set up well on offense to beat the Cardinals. And I think the specific limitations or downsides for Kyler make this a pretty juicy game for the defense as well, especially like with the ability to get a couple turnovers. So with that, I want to flip it over kind of to some interesting things. So Ivan Pace has gone on IR, and the Vikings have brought in Jamin Davis. And then they've also cut two players who are a little bit relevant draft picks who, in, I believe, 2022 in Akayleb Evans and Nick Muse. Akayleb Evans has already been claimed by the Carolina Panthers off of waivers, so he will not be back. I believe the Vikings are trying to get Nick Muse back on the practice squad. He's kind of been a guy who's been throughout his career up and down, so that one's not a major thing to me. I won't go a little bit deeper into that. But the big one is Ivan Pace to IR. Right. And I don't think the Vikings necessarily, I talked a little bit about, especially in run defense against the Cardinals, how it might be an issue, but I love Ivan Pace as a player. I think he's an absolute spark plug. I love him as a blitzer and I love him coming forward against the run. I think Ivan Pace still has major struggles in coverage. So I love the energy that Ivan Pace brings. I think the Vikings defense is going to miss that, but from an overall schematic importance, I don't know how high Ivan Pace is up on my list for the Vikings, right? Like if I list off players who I think are more important from the Vikings, I'm going to get to 8 or 9 before I get to Ivan Pace. Grenard is more important. Van Ginkel's more important. Cashman's more important at the linebacker position. The corners are more important, particularly Byron Murphy and Stephon Gilmore. All three of the safeties are more important in Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, and Josh Metellus. So that's like most of the defense. I think Harrison Phillips is a lot more important just of what he brings as a captain on the defensive line and his run defense ability than what Ivan Pace brings. I think you can argue that Jonathan Bullard and Shaq Griffin are more important just because Shaq plays corner, which is a more important position and has the value for coverage. And Jonathan Bullard has been absolutely lights out as a run defender across the course of the year as well. So you're getting, close to like 10, 11 players in terms of importance. So I think Kamu Grugier-Hill, from what we've seen from him so far this year, can fill in and actually help the Vikings coverage a little bit with Ivan Pace out. He's not going to be nearly as effective coming forward. And that's the big downside to missing Ivan Pace. I think what's interesting is the Vikings signing Jamin Davis from, he was formerly with Washington. I think he got cut earlier this year. He was an off-ball linebacker. They moved him to edge rusher. He's a lot bigger than Pace is. And so here's the thing. Pace is a very stocky player. Like, he is a built-up player. He's 230 plus pounds despite being 5'10", right? So, like, when I say bigger, I mostly mean taller for Davis, but, like, that probably matters along the linebacker. Like, Pace's size is the reason he went undrafted. So Davis's size is an advantage when comparing him to Pace. But for Davis, he just hasn't been able to put it all together from an instincts perspective. That makes it interesting to me because I think that the role that Ivan Pace plays going forward, attacking opposing offensive linemen, attacking opposing running backs and blitzes, might be a solution to get usefulness out of Jamin Davis. It was what worked very well for Devin White when he was a star with the Bucs, right? And got all these accolades that he probably didn't deserve. It kind of worked for Patrick Queen with the Ravens, and I think he kind of turned into a more well-rounded player. Now, Devin White wasn't able to replicate that success, elsewhere. And Jamin Davis hasn't been all that high level of a player so far in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see if the Vikings get anything at all out of him. But I think with a couple weeks in the system, we start rotating him in situations where we would want pace in the game, kind of moving forward and blitzing, and we see what we get from him. So that's kind of my take on Jamin Davis. The other take I want to have is on Akayleb Evans a little bit. Like, I was never Evans' biggest fan. I thought there was promise, and I thought he certainly showed promise last year. I thought the end of the last year was obviously a disaster, and then he didn't really seem to recover fully from that and be able to play and execute at a high level. So I get the Vikings releasing him, and I guess he had been usurped on special teams, especially after one of the disastrous games that he had by Trent Sherfield, and obviously Sherfield, I think it's just a better special teamer than what Evans was going to bring. So it's tough for the Vikings that they don't have any corners under contract for next year, right? I think Dwight McLaughlin on a rookie UDFA 3-year contract is the only one who is actually, has a signed deal for next year. Maybe technically Najee Thompson too, who's on IR, but all the other guys are on 1-year deals. So I would have liked to see him develop and become, a potential starter. But if the Vikings cut him, obviously they didn't really see that in the cards. So I can't really blame them too much for that. But Evans getting cut is kind of interesting to me because it shows, it kind of highlighted me, and I looked it up, the overall lack of roster movement that the Vikings have had over the course of the season. So if you look at it, the only 2 cuts that they've had that have ended up going elsewhere were, Jaron Hall, who I guess is currently with the Seahawks, and now Akayleb Evans, who got rostered by the Panthers. Nick Muse is still TBD. I expect he'll go back to the practice squad. And then Tristan Jackson was the only other cut, and he's currently on the Vikings practice squad, right? So that was just kind of roster shenanigans. Like, they wanted somebody else in instead of another wide receiver who wasn't being active in any of the weeks. So they demoted Tristan Jackson to the practice squad and got lucky that nobody claimed him, right? So besides those moves, everything else has been players going on IR, right? You have obviously Christian Darrisaw going on IR. You have 2/3 of the special teamers going on IR. You now have Ivan Pace going on IR. And then if you look at like the players they've added, it's been like TJ Hockenson coming back from IR. Gabe Murphy, who's also a candidate to kind of do what Ivan Pace did, even if he's more of a true edge rusher, in my opinion, coming back from IR. And then you have injury replacements, right? So they brought in Brett Rippon from the outside. They brought back Cam Akers, who was with the team last year, from the outside. But if you look at the other players that they've promoted or added, right? Cam Robinson, they traded for because of Christian Darrisaw. Jamin Davis, they added because Ivan Pace got hurt. The kicker, Parker Romo, they added because Will Rickard got hurt. Technically, Jake McQuaid's a practice squad guy, so he doesn't count as somebody who got added to the roster, but they added him because Andrew DePaula got hurt. TJ Hockenson came back from IR, right? That was one of the other moves. So like you look at, Dalton Risner came back from IR was another one of the moves. Taki Taimani on the defensive side was the guy who kind of went on IR to swap that out, right? So like you look at all of those moves, and the Vikings really had everybody in their system except for, players that were very specifically injury replacements, or I guess Brett Rippon, who they just preferred to Jaron Hall, right? So the Vikings have kept guys within the system. They've promoted them when they think, when they have injuries or something like that. And only when they've had major injuries is when they kind of go outside the system at positions they can't replace in-house, right? So it's been a pretty interesting roster management from the Vikings this year from that perspective. To me, just because I think they really believe in the talent that they have in the building, and it's proved out that they're a 9-2 football team, right? Like, this is a lot better team than I think anybody in the Viking sphere would have expected prior to the season. So I will just want to credit the Vikings roster building for the fact that they haven't even had to move outside of their own building for the vast majority of moves this season. And the only times they have had to do that was due to injury. I guess the other talking point is Daniel Jones, right? I would love for the Vikings to replace Brett Rippon with Daniel Jones. If they bring him in, I'm sure his Giants contract has offsets, so they would just have to pay him the minimum because Jones would obviously want to stick it to him. And the rest of what he's getting paid this year would just be the minimum salary for the team that signs him, because he's already getting paid, $20+ million or whatever it is from the New York Giants that would offset otherwise, would be my expectation. So with that in mind, I think Jones is a good add. I think it would be important for the Vikings to look ahead to next year. I think Sam Darnold has kind of priced himself out with his level of play of a stopgap option for the Vikings if they want to start JJ McCarthy. So I think you want to try to look at bringing in somebody, because Nick Mullins is also a free agent, and I think Daniel Jones is just a better player than Nick Mullins flat out. Like, there's a reason Daniel Jones was a starting quarterback and got that contract, even if he's not all that good. Nick Mullins is a great guy to have in the room because I think he brings a high level of mental capacity, but I just don't think he has the physical ability to be a high level quarterback. So he's not a guy I would really want as my option if for some reason JJ McCarthy isn't ready, or if for some reason JJ McCarthy doesn't look good, right? Like, I think the Vikings still need to have a JJ McCarthy contingency plan, even if I believe he is the guy moving forward. And I think he will be excellent once he starts for the Vikings. So I think bringing in Daniel Jones on a minimum deal to evaluate that would be a smart decision. And I think really it's up to Daniel Jones with his preference with who he's going to sign, because I don't think he's going to earn more money anywhere else just because of the way the contract language offsets work. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Daniel Jones thing. So lots of Vikings roster movement there. I am under an hour, which is about a record for me, even doing these solo podcasts. So I will call it, I made this a little bit shorter than the typical podcast because I'm a little bit under the weather. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at Fries Football. That's good on both Twitter and BlueSky. You can follow my co-host. And I pretty much stopped posting on Twitter. Like, I'll post a couple things that are too long for BlueSky, but if you want to see my film analysis that I go through every week and all the clips that I post every single week, please go ahead over to BlueSky and follow me on there. Like, I just prefer using it from the user experience at this point. I don't have a weird ad every 3 posts. I'm sure they'll add ads eventually, but I'm very much enjoying not having them right now. Nick Olson at Nick Olson NFL on Twitter. You can follow the podcast at Kindred Skulls on both Twitter and BlueSky. You can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on YouTube. And with me getting through all of that in one breath somehow, Skol Vikings.